Now, MOA. Many people will just say, okay, antidepressants treat the chemical imbalance, or antidepressant restore serotonin deficiency. No. Okay. No. Hopefully I have the thumbnail ready by the time I've released this video, but you should already have a clear idea of what I would really hate about when talking about antidepressant mechanisms of action. That is completely wrong. Okay, as early as now, let's just erase chemical imbalance. Let's erase monoamine deficiency. That's wrong, completely wrong. So we're pharmacists and we're supposed to be medication experts, but you know, these kinds of misconceptions are so rampant in the profession. It's embarrassing, to be honest. So how exactly do antidepressants work? Okay, featuring my brilliant MS Paint skills. Let's label the parts accordingly. I mean, you're probably already familiar with how serotonin is produced and stored, right? You have amino acids, its precursor being tryptophan and all, brought into the presynaptic neuron, which is up there, the one that does not, wait. I can extend this pala. There we go. Yeah, the one that my finger does not reach, the presynaptic neuron. Tryptophan is brought in there, and it's already biotransformed into serotonin, where it is stored in vesicles. Okay, we're good with that. Okay, but you know, the usual process, when it's needed, it's going to be released into the synaptic cleft, which is the space here. This space here, yeah, that space. The space, that's the synaptic cleft, and it binds to the receptors. And when it's done binding to the receptors, it goes back into the, to extend again, here we go, the transporter. It's corresponding transporter where it goes back to the presynaptic neuron and stored in vesicles. Okay, we're good with that, right? Okay, so the labels, just so you're not confused, okay, just to review on the labels. Now, how do antidepressants work? Specifically, the serotonin transporter blocker. So SERT stands for serotonin transporter. For convenience, in the past, I would just lump them all together here into one discussion, but I realized it was a bit confusing from a pharmacological standpoint. So I decided to better explain the nuances of each drug. I would separate the discussion into both serotonin transporter blockers and the ones that do not actually focus on blocking the serotonin transporter. It's a very easy dichotomy, at least with this regard. Okay, so what happens when these drugs start blocking, if they start blocking the serotonin transporter, I feel like feel disembodied. This isn't right. Serotonin transporter here, okay, they start blocking that. What happens? The serotonin transporter is blocked. It is no longer working. What happens when it stops working? The serotonin that's in the synaptic cleft, it's been binding to the postsynaptic receptors, the various serotonin receptor subtypes. Yeah, it's been binding. Then what? They're stuck. Naflatan sila. They got a flat tire. They're stuck here, and they start increasing. And you know, when there are neurotransmitters in the synaptic cleft, they have nothing to do. What else will they do? They're going to bind to the receptors there. Right? Those being the presynaptic and postsynaptic receptors. And what happens when serotonin has a bit too much of its receptor, particularly the presynaptic receptors? So you notice the presynaptic receptors, they have downregulated, because that's a bit, in Tagalog we say na umay. Okay, they just got tired of, like, okay, no more. Let's just, there's too much serotonin, let's kind of tone it down a bit. So the body's trying to rebalance that bit. And what happens is, the first thing that will downregulate is the presynaptic serotonin 5-HT1A receptor. These 5-HT1A presynaptic receptors, they have downregulated. And what are these exactly? These are what you call autoreceptors. What do? They're like brakes, preno in Tagalog. So normally, they stop the release of serotonin into the synaptic cleft. So you like pressing on the brakes. So initially, binding to them, you would see a decrease of serotonin release, sure. But eventually, they start downregulating. So the primary effect you will see in the biochemical level is there will be more serotonin now. You see here, lots of serotonin here in the synaptic cleft. That's the biochemical effect. The clinical effect, apparently, with the downregulation of a 5-HT1A presynaptic receptors is our stress tolerance kind of improves. So we can passively tolerate stress better. So we call that passive coping, which is not necessarily meaning you'll be immune to stress. Again, this is increased stress tolerance. But if you still have very maladaptive ways of coping and dealing with stress, that's not gonna really do much for you. But it's one way this helps, at least. Okay? So, okay, now you have a lot more again. So that means what happens to the biochemical level, the brakes are gone, right? The brakes are gone. There is nothing stopping serotonin from being released. So now it's a flood of serotonin. See that? It's a flood of serotonin. I can't tilt my body right. In the synaptic left. And what are they going to bind to next? They're going to bind to the postsynaptic receptor here. I can still point to it. The postsynaptic receptor. And you notice the postsynaptic receptor is also now downregulated. There, that's the postsynaptic 5-HT1A and 2A. Those postsynaptic receptors, they have downregulated. So initially, in the first few weeks, the flood of serotonin, that actually explains a lot of the side effects. Okay, that's why usually the first week or so of antidepressant treatment, there are a lot of side effects. Wherever serotonin is, you'll expect there to be side effects there. Right, so it's actually, I'll show you later in detail. I'll explain the table, what it actually means in depth. Eventually, because the postsynaptic receptors downregulate, these are usually what are causing the side effects. Now that they've downregulated, this is when the body develops what we call tolerance. Now there is tolerance to side effects. You kind of experience at least a little bit of respite, relief from the initial side effects. It might still be there, but to a lesser extent, at least for some people. Okay, but is that where it stops? No. Okay, so we mentioned that the downregulation of presynaptic 5-HT1A autoreceptors helps with passive coping. But what happens when the postsynaptic serotonin receptors downregulate? What happens is, well, there's a lot more that happens actually. You notice everything we explained is just that top portion there, that one that is highlighted there. That's all of that we just discussed. It's just that. What happens when the receptors downregulate? There is a cascade of reactions. A signal transduction occurs, culminating in a delayed release of what we call brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this brain-derived neurotrophic factor is, well, it's very good at forming brain connections, basically, which I'll explain more in depth in a bit. But in short, please delete. I would like everyone watching this video, it's not visible. There we go. Everyone watching this video, I am holding the giant sword that hopefully should be visible in the thumbnail. If you are watching this, please delete chemical imbalance serotonin deficiency from your vocabulary. That is absolute rubbish. The transparency doesn't let me show the sword swing. But anyway, okay, get rid of that. Completely get rid of that, okay? There is no such thing. There is absolutely no such thing. You can joke about it, sure. I'm not gonna police how you cope and, dropping serotonin jokes and all that. It's fine. But please do not say it in a serious manner because it's absolutely wrong. Okay? Now, I talked about side effects earlier. Yeah. Well, actually, more of it's a mixture of benefits and side effects. So you'll see serotonin is not a very simple molecule because whenever people hear serotonin, they think like, happiness or elation, euphoria, whatever, positive, quote-unquote, things like that, mushy stuff. But when you look at what the serotonin receptors, first of all, how many subtypes there are, the parts of the brain they're located in, and the different functions they have, you realize it's not very clear-cut. Personally, when I see this list, it makes me wish I had less serotonin. Because I personally am a very anxious person. That's just my personality. And I feel like there's just too much serotonin at my postsynaptic 5-HT1A receptors. I'm like, please stop. No more serotonin. I'm so tired of serotonin. I would like less of that. I would like less of the receptors, please. Okay, so here's what you actually mean. When you say, I wish I had more serotonin, you are saying you want more serotonin at the 5-HT3 receptors. That means you want more nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. You are saying you want more serotonin at the 5-HT2 receptors in your spinal cord. Saying you want more sexual dysfunction, I guess. Saying you want more serotonin at the 5-HT2C receptors in your hypothalamus, meaning you want your sleep to be disrupted. Okay, so again, it's not very cut and dry talking about how serotonin works exactly, but you'll see that's why the receptor downregulation is actually a good thing, because after a week or so, the not so nice stuff kind of diminishes with time. So there's tolerance to the unpleasant stuff, at least. Okay, so the nausea, vomiting, the gut stuff, the anxiety, sleep, etc. At least there's a bit less of that. And you get more of the long-term beneficial stuff, the delayed increase in brain-derived neurotrophic factor, for instance. Okay, there are also some serotonin receptors outside the brain. So I don't know if you're still being taught about the ergot alkaloids. There's a reason we don't use bergolin pergolides. I don't even remember their names anymore because we don't use them, because those are agonists at the 5-HT2B receptors, and you activate those, heart valve problems. Okay, so later on, this serotonin in the platelets, we're gonna talk about that a lot in interactions. Yeah, if you remember the hemostasis mechanisms, the platelet adhesion, aggregation, and coagulation cascade, yeah, serotonin plays a role in one of those steps here, which should be relevant in the drug interactions. So we really tie in a lot to physiology again, right? So talking about brain-derived neurotrophic factor, how exactly is that beneficial? Okay, so I mentioned it helps form more connections between brain cells, which we do need a lot of. So this helps with learning, particularly learning healthier ways of thinking, healthier ways of coping. That's what a lot of people with depression do need help with that. Personally, I needed help with that a lot when I had depression. So yeah, increase, we call that neuroplasticity. So formation of connections between neurons. Okay, how does it do that? I mean, I could go on and on about that, but in short, BDNF itself has a whole nother set of cascades, because BDNF itself has a receptor called TRKB. BDNF binds to it. It has another cascade here, which eventually results in the connections between neurons. So, mahabang proseso pa yan, actually. Okay? So, this is a figure from the Malhi et al. Clinical Practice Guidelines that actually summarizes how things work here. So, you have the MOA here. So, you have the transporters here. They are blocked, kunwari, or the presynaptic receptors for the non-SERT blockers. So, pero for now, sige, SERT blockers, you block the transporter. So, the dami ang nasa synaptic cleft. Yan, ang dami na nila. Okay? And they start downregulating, desensitizing the presynaptic receptors and the, turn my finger, postsynaptic receptors. This is so weird to look at. So, the postsynaptic receptors are downregulated. And that leads to a cascade. So you have the G protein, adenylyl cyclase, ATP converted to CAMP. CAMP activates protein kinase phosphorylates the CREB. CREB is a CAMP response element binding protein. It's a transcription factor, the DNA. So once this is phosphorylated, your DNA will then be encouraged to produce more of what we are looking for, the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Yan, the dami ang BDNF, and so on and so forth.